Welcome everybody to the end of year event Wrapped 2020 of the Reddit Legends of Runeterra community. I'm Boronian, I'm your host today. So I want to introduce myself shortly before I give word to my other guests. Before Legends of Runeterra, I exclusively played Duelist for 4 years, till the game shut down this February, which is sad for the game but good for Legends of Runeterra because that's how I came over. I served in a similar role there as I do here, with being a mod, but mostly I had to wear more hats back then because we had a smaller community. So I created a wiki, I organized tournaments and events, I casted tournaments, I made replay analysis for new players and new player guides, and I moderated subreddit. And that's exactly what I do here too. Not for the main Reddit, but for the smaller one, the competitive subreddit. It's a perfect place for me because I love being competitive and improving on my place in small details and also improving a community by doing all kind of things. So enough about me. I'm very excited to do this tonight. And now I want to introduce my first guest, rLW. Someone I have known for several years since we met in Duelist. And he's aiming to get his master's degree in philosophy right now, but want to continue on with a PhD. And on the side, he's playing Legends of Runeterra competitively as a tournament player, and he's one of the best in the scene. Just yesterday, he won the Giant Slayer Fight Night. So congratulations for that. Tell us something about your year of Legends of Runeterra, your highlights, and your wishes for the game.
Thanks for inviting me, Boronian. Hello to everybody, to the guests, and to everyone who is watching us. I'm very into Legends of Runeterra right now. I was kind of playing. I kind of started card games with digital card games with Hearthstone back on 2014, if I recall correctly. Then I played it competitively for quite some time. Then I stopped enjoying the game and I moved on, and that's how I got into Duelist. That was a game that I enjoyed quite a bit. I think that it was very competitive, but then the game just didn't find enough success that the developers were expecting. So yeah, the game well kind of failed and it shut down this February. Then I got to move on, and then I got into Legend of Runeterra. I was quite anxious for the open beta. I was watching some closed beta action on Twitch before that. Then when it came out on open beta, I got into it and I started to enjoy the game quite a bit. It it has some mechanics that I love. The simultaneous actions for the players during the turns. It's what really grasps for me. Uh, we had that on Artifact. That I think that it was an inspiration for Legends of Runeterra. And it was implemented in Legends of Runeterra quite well. I like a lot the game, how you got so many options inside a turn. You got to pass the action to your opponent. You got to open attack. You got to develop first and then attack. You got to just continue to pass because you have some kind of advantage overall in the game, and you don't need to take your actions first. So yeah, it has a lot of depth. I like that a lot. I think that the game has plenty of space to express ability and skill. So yeah, I like that a lot. I played it a lot this year. The expansion, the Rising Tide expansion was pretty good in my opinion. I like it very much. Then the Call of the Mountain as well was a pretty good expansion. It got us as a community pretty hyped. The way that they releases they spoil the cards are pretty nice and get the community very engaged with the overall thing. And we got the in the end of the year the seasonal tournament that I think that unified us even more as a community. You got to see a lot of players and streamers getting together and to watch and to practice for the seasonal tournaments, and then watching the Asian tournament or the Southeast Asian tournament before the American and the Europeans won. And yeah, I think that the community right now is very unified. I think we have something very special here, not even from a competitive point of view, but as a community point of view as well. So yeah, I'm very engaged of Legends of Runeterra. Sometimes I kind of disappear from the community because of my studies, because I gotta focus a bit more on my studies to get the things going straight. But then I always come back to play the game. And the in the this year, the final of the year, I got to spend some more time. That's why I got to play this Giant Slayer Fright Night uh, yesterday, and I played the seasonal tournament, and I practiced a bit for it. Yeah, I think that resumes a bit of what Runeterra is for me.
Thanks.
Damn.
This was a good one. So, next I want to introduce Hsuku. Hsuku is one of the most consistent streamers I've known since my duelist days, years ago. He's an expert in tactical games. His interest at heart is deck building, and hence his love and critical nature for draft modes. He has won draft tournaments and casted some. He has streamed nearly 2,000 consecutive days, no days off. And since the Legends of Runeterra beta, he has not missed one single day of playing LOR. Conquering masters with creative off-meta decks, often surprising his opponents with new ideas. Hsuku, how was your year of Legend of Runeterra? What are your highlights, and what do you wish from the game, and what do you would like to see differently?
Well, first of all, I just want to say congrats to 4LW for that win in the tournament. I'm gonna be a lot shorter though. For my just for my year of Legends of Runeterra, it's been a fantastic time. I mean, I've had a great time playing the game. My problems with the game are very minor. In a lot of games I play these days, there's just so many things that are wrong with the game. In Legends of Runeterra, it's a real pleasure to play. It's just fantastic. Um, that said, I'm going to be talking about a few things that I don't like, but not just yet. But just to preface it, this game's been fantastic. For the first time in Legends of Runeterra, though, I did join a tournament like 2 or 3 weeks ago just to try and see what it's like. So I'm pretty fresh when it comes to that. I did relatively well. I did the tournament that was like built into the game, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was pleasantly surprised at how hurt I was after after the results came in, and I went 8-2, mostly because I died to a Pearl list that I was not expecting that, and yeah, that was exciting for me, and because of that experience, now I'm exploring some of the smaller tournaments that I see coming up, and I think I'll try and go in on that as time goes by. But the year for the year for me in Legends of Runeterra has been really really good. Also, I want to say I'm old school duelist like Boronian and like 4LW. I didn't know this before. I didn't know 4LW was going to be here. I didn't know these things. So, wow, we're all from the same place, coming in strong here, and we're all having fun here. So, all right.
Thanks. Though now the duelist band, it's we are the last ones because now we're coming to Impetuous Panda, and I don't have to say much about him, but I will say some things anyways. He's an old Gwent veteran and caster, and he's already well-known member because he posted a lot of great deck guides to the subreddit. He always does the regular balance patch and expansion surveys, which is really great because I love them, love reading them, love seeing what the community thinks. And he's also casting tournaments. Just recently, the Giant Slayer Legend of Runeterra tournament, and he also is doing a podcast with Mogwai, another old duelist guy. The Progress Day podcast, which is awesome. And Rubin was on it too already in the past, and Swim. So would love to see a new episode of that. But since last month, Panda is very well known, of course, because then he was one of the forecasters for the first big Riot organized tournament, the EU Master Tournament. And yeah, so I think everybody knows him now because this tournament was a huge success. It was fun to watch and it was excellent, was great, and would love to see more of it. So yeah, Panda, how was your year?
It was great. I want to mention about the Progress Day podcast. Ruben cursed it because the episode he came on after that, Mogwai had problems with it, and we haven't had an episode since like July, I think. So hopefully, I did enjoy it a lot. I think Ruben also enjoyed that episode. So I want to convince Mogwai to get it back on track. Anyone that's watching that might be a fan of it, I'll try my best to have a new episode at some point next year, hopefully. But yeah, I've enjoyed casting esports for card games specifically. Starting with Gwent about 3 years ago. When Runeterra came out, I was very excited, not just from a standpoint of a player and enjoying card games, but from a professional standpoint, because Riot is a major player in esports in general, and having them backing a card game, which is kind of my genre and my expertise, was fantastic news. And I think it's proven why. I mean, just how quickly it's ramped up into having a really great competitive scene with big tournaments that are in client, and overall just a great experience has been fantastic to see. And having the opportunity to cast for Riot in the EU Masters, like you mentioned, and the seasonal has also been great. And looking forward to just what it's going to turn into next year once seasonal becomes a recurring thing every 2 months, and hopefully I get to work with Riot further into the year as well, not just a one-time thing, ideally. But yeah, that's basically it. Just I've been a caster for Runeterra the past year. I've enjoyed it a lot, and with the surveys and the different content I've done on Reddit, I think I enjoy making content, but in a more unique way, because I think a lot of people can make deck guides on YouTube and everything, but you're kind of doing the same thing. And of course, different people have different personalities, so you get a different mix. But I like doing more unique stuff, and I think data analysis and doing surveys and stuff offers a pretty unique perspective on what players think and the perception and stuff. So I always enjoy doing it, and I think people like it a lot as well. So I will continue in the future as well.
Thanks a lot. And I'm looking forward to that too. So glad to have you here. And last but not least, of course, the lead of the live balancing team himself, Riot RubinZoo, an ex-MTG player, pro, with multiple top placements at Grand Prix events and one win at the Pro Tour event 2015. So someone with a lot of experience with card games in a competitive sense. And Ruben made such a big name for himself that Riot invited him to consult on Legends of Runeterra. I think it was one of the great ideas, and Ruben thought so too, I guess, because he stayed and became, the live balance lead for the game. There's not much more needed to say. You all know him. He's one of the most approachable and present Riot devs we have, I think. And I loved it about him. You can talk with him on Twitter. You can see him in different Twitch streams like ours today, or on podcasts like a Progress Day in the past. Yeah. Ruben, how was your year?
Unmute.
He's muted.
Unmute myself. There we go. Thanks, Boronian. Yeah, it's been an amazing year, and that was a spot on introduction. I'm glad that you said all that stuff so I don't have to and look weird. But yeah, I think that this year was the year that Legends of Runeterra launched to players, and I think for me, that's a really important milestone kind of in my career and my life, because we had I spent so many years working on the secret R&D projects, and all my friends would like poke questions at me like, oh, like, we know you're working on a card game, tell us. So just that we're out in the world and I get to be this community figure for the game is amazing. The year, definitely we've learned a lot throughout the year, and I think that the live balance team not only has kind of like learned a lot from players, but has gotten better over time. And now we even have a second person on the team. So it's not just me. So that's really exciting. And we're building out that sustainability for the future. But just thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to get into this discussion.
Yeah, me too. And it's exciting. And of course, I have the first topic we want to talk about is one you can say a lot about, but I think the others will chime in. And it's balancing. So first of all, when is the next balance patch coming? Because a lot of people expected 1.16 to be a balance patch, and there was nothing. So they hope for some go hard nerfs.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting time for us, and I'll say that this next balance patch is going to probably be a bit off our normal cadence because of how the holidays are working out. We definitely want to get in those balance changes as we see fit, but also we need to adhere to our release schedule. As much as I'd love to throw in a bunch of changes, nobody's working right now. This is my first day actually off for winter break, like all of Riot. So the next patch is probably unfortunately not going to be until early February. We have a patch lined up in January, but it is a situation where a lot of those changes have already gone in. So we are looking to hopefully have some player patience with us getting this next patch out, though we have a long time to work on it and make sure that it really resonates with the players.
Fascinating. Next February, but January is a patch coming, and then the next February is the bigger one, or big one too. So how would you rate balance all over? Are you happy how it is, or do you feel like you're always struggling to keep up? Or are you saying, we are fine, we think we're doing a good job mostly, the game is pretty balanced, a lot of things are viable, and you can play pretty much almost every champion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of balance, generally, I always call it kind of balance is a buzzword, because I think that in general, lore, at least when you look at the data, is very balanced. When a deck becomes very good, there are normally a lot of tools that players can use, or strategies that they can learn to sort of combat those decks that are deemed over. That said, I think that oftentimes we're thinking about gameplay health and just metagame health over strictly balance, right? While we say at Riot that we're data informed and not data driven, which basically means that we're going to use the data we have available for us to look at what the problems are, and then it's kind of my job to figure out what is this a problem for the game? What can we do about it? That kind of thing. So I would say that in general, in terms of balance, I think we're good. But in terms of like the health of the metagame, can you play different sorts of archetypes? And as you said, like, are different champions' gameplay dreams realizable, which is something that we pursue greatly on the live team. I would say, that's mostly our focus. And I say that the game right now is actually in a pretty good state. I think that, the new set just dropped, so we're going to have to wait and see a little bit to get some of the more data and more enfranchised decks out there to really make some positive decisions, which is part of the reason why it's kind of hard for us to sort of preload changes for next year, because, we don't know what's going to happen with the new set.
That's true. So rLW played yesterday in the Giant Slayer tournament, and like we said before, and it's a tournament which was just after the release of the new expansion. What was your experience there with the new decks, new cards, and how was the meta on the tournament?
Yeah, there was a half of the the tournament that brought some new archetypes using new cards, trying like things like Grand Plaza with Shadow Isles, and trying Zoe. I don't think there was a player who brought Victor or Riven, but there was 2 Zoes, if I recall correctly. The what happened that it was that the players who brought new stuff got eliminated very quickly, and I don't know how representative that is, but I don't think that is much. It's probably because like the decks aren't optimized yet. So the top 4 of the tournament was kind of using old decks. On the grand finals, me versus Stan, there was only one new card that was Ballistic Bot. I was using it on my Yasriel Draven deck. I think it's a very great addition, and it's probably one of my. It's probably in my top 3 cards of this new expansion. So yeah, I think that the new decks aren't optimized yet. I think that there are plenty of cards that can be used in older archetypes that you can fit them into good decks that are already consolidated. But I think that are space for new archetypes as well. I think Victor is a very good champion. I think that you can find a good deck with it, maybe the highest tier possible. I don't like Riven that much, especially because her blade, when you finally get it, it's low. I didn't get why her blade isn't burst but with combat restrictions like the fragments of the blade. I think that would be great to have it burst so you could open attack with Riven and her blade, so she wouldn't be too exposed to things like Runation and Avarazan, Ice Veil Archer, things like that.
It's
It
interesting
could
that you
be
say
too.
that because Riven Ash won in the Giant Slayer tournament in the EU, I heard. So apparently it was in EU a different experience than in the American shard. So
But if I am
yeah.
right, I don't think it was a Riven based deck. I think it was just a splash, something like a support for Ash. If I know that right, it was like Sejuani on the Ash Sejuani deck, but it was using Riven, if I am correct.
Yeah, I can comment a bit on it. It was, basically just replacing Sejuani. There was a version of the deck that had some reforged keywords. So Runeweaver was added and 2 Weapon Hilts. So it wasn't just trading Sejuani for Ribbon. There was a bit of a reforged package, but it wasn't as impactful. It was still an Ash Frostbite deck mainly. So I don't think, I think Riven was maybe a bit overrated, at least looking at the survey, into what I saw from the tournaments yesterday in EU and NA. And Victor wasn't played at all in this tournament either. I think he still has to, maybe people have to find a way to play him in a competitive setting. I think he's very fun, and you can definitely play him on ladder and Diamond and Masters and find success. But in a very competitive format, I think no one has really found the right deck to play him in just yet.
How did you guys feel about the Riven list compared to the Sejuani version?
It was too small of a sample size to really get any conclusions
Yeah.
from, because, and again, you're only changing a few cards, so you didn't really see a turn where Riven did anything too different from what Sejuani would have done. Like, it wasn't very impactful, I think, from the games I saw. It was mostly just Farron winning the game, or Ash with no blockers, etc. Like kind of the same game plan. So it's hard to tell if it's too impactful. And I haven't seen too much on ladder either. I've seen some Draven Riven lists, and some Lee Sin Riven lists that I think might be very strong once people find kind of fine tune it, but for now I think it's too early to say anything definitive.
Yeah, so let's talk about the expansion in general. What is your experience with the new expansion? So Panda, you just mentioned you played already some games. So what decks did you bring? What did you try out, and what did you see?
I've tried a few decks. I think Grand Plaza is, I think everyone can tell it's very strong. I think that's the question that Ruben might have to answer later on. If there's some people that maybe, obviously when a strong card comes out, people always kind of blow it out of proportion and, ask for nerfs immediately, like day one without any testing. It does seem like a strong card and a card that, if not changed, will be a staple in Demacia for a long time. And it's a card that enables so many different strategies. I've seen it played in, 5 or 6 different variants in the Giant Slayer tournaments yesterday as well. So it's definitely going to be an impactful card in the meta. I'm not sure if it's going to be too strong or not. I think Ruben might have to answer to that later, but definitely Grand Plaza is very strong. Ballistic Bot in Burn, in Victor decks is a very strong 2-drop that's going to be staple as well. And it's good to see PNZ having a bigger identity and having its own kind of thing going for it. Even though there are still some cards that are not going to see a lot of play, I think. But it's definitely a very good step in the right direction where PNZ finally comes out of where it was and is definitely more playable now, which is good to see.
Hsuku, I saw you also play a lot. So what do you see, or do you agree with Panda, or do you have some other insights?
Oh, Plaza is definitely strong. Yeah, Plaza is definitely strong. I built it. The reason I don't play it on the stream right now is because I'm trying to experiment with all the new things, not just one card. If I played it, I felt like it was maybe a bit overtuned, and so I stopped playing it because I just want to experiment with other things. I think the other thing that might be interesting to talk about is actually Targon's Peak, because I really, really enjoy that card. I think it might be crazy, but hear me out. It's a symmetric effect that's self-balancing, such that if the deck ever became really popular, you'd be facing off against other people, and then the ideal play is to not play Targon's Peak. It's to wait till your opponent plays Targon's Peak. It's just I kind of really like that about it, but at the same time, it might be a little too cheap or something. I don't know. But I like the idea and the principle behind it. So that was a really, really fun card to play with. I have not lost a game with that deck, so I stopped playing that too. But like, again, it's a small sample size. I played 8 games. It's not a huge sample size of games. I had a lot of fun with a bunch. I can't think of anything else. Oh yeah, of course, Ballistic Bot is nuts. I think that can't be understated. Uh, you're producing value with a body size that's actually relevant. Like, it's not going to die to a Mystic Shot. It's yeah, that card is really strong as well. Um, and I think the way the game is played, or the game was designed, is that it isn't just for competitive players. So I think there are a lot of cards in there that you might not see competitively, but you just want to play with them anyway. And I think that's great. I think that's really fantastic because it allows you to kind of flex your muscles a little bit. You might take out some of the ideal cards and put some of your fun cards in a flex spot, for example, and still, do just fine in Masters. You might just do fine in Master. So I actually really like the expansion. I think it's too early to tell anything, honestly. It's just too early because you haven't been able to build counters, even conceive of those counters yet. It just came out. So I don't know if you guys have different ideas on that or what have you, but I know people are calling for nerfs right off the bat, and I'm like, you give it a little bit of time. Give it a little bit of time. Let it breathe a little bit.
So Ruben, what were your expectations with this expansion, and are you happy with how it goes right now with it, or do you see this card or this didn't work as we expected it to work? I mean, it's very early, of course.
Yeah, it's really early to answer some of those questions, and I think that we generally see the pattern of players kind of experimenting with competitive ladder, experimenting with new cards that might not necessarily be competitive, like Hsuku was saying, for at least like the first few days after release. Though so far, we'll see when there's sort of the regression back to the meta decks that we know and love. And I know that a lot of players have sort of given us feedback around like, man, they really don't like when some certain decks kind of like persist in the meta for long periods of time. In terms of how the champions specifically are doing and the landmarks, since those are like the big parts of this expansion, as well as the theme around created cards, I think that there's been a lot of different combinations. Not, we have our specific champion pairings in mind when we design champions, but it's awesome to see players experiment with stuff like Rib and Ash and stuff that might be a bit more off the beaten cuff. So I've been pretty happy with what I've seen so far. We definitely have some like power outliers, which is kind of to be expected. In terms of champion impact, we'll probably see over time like regression in play rate and see if we can do anything. It gets harder and harder as our game has so many cards in it, right? And we're doing retroactive balance to bad champions, which means that the champions that come out like have a lot to sort of overcome. Which is kind of why on live, at least, we're going with the sort of approach where we sort of focus on maybe buffing the champions that are underperforming right after they're released, which I think has been pretty successful so far. So we'll see if we have to do that. I have my suspicions over which champions. Well, generally, I keep a lot of my opinions secret on things. So, though it is interesting to see a lot of people memeing on Zoe in particular, which is interesting. So we'll just see how everything ends up playing out.
Could you give us a small hint as to what you can see or what you perceive as being the weakest champion that you might be looking into adjusting?
It's definitely too early. I mean, my opinion is that I think Victor is the weakest of the three that were released, and
Really? Oh,
maybe I don't know.
well, that's right. Keep going.
I don't normally talk too much about this kind of stuff, so but I think that like. Yeah, we'll just have to see. I haven't really thought of any particular buffs or anything already, so.
Fascinating. I love these little tidbits we hear here. Anyone else want to say anything about the?
Yeah, it's not really a strong feeling. It's just kind of like when put on the spot, that's who I think is probably, but I could be wrong.
It's So first when Zoe was released, I thought, oh my god, this is even, I remember it's even harder than TF. But then I remember how we all spoke about TF when he was revealed. We said, oh, never. You can never level him up. That doesn't work. You have to go all in on him, and that makes it's too strong a commitment. This champion is really weak. And then he came out, we played a little bit with it, and then suddenly there were these crazy decks. And I feel like this could be happening with Zoe too, where everybody thinks, wow, she is really hard to level up. This is 1 health, this dies to everything. And then someone finds a deck to break it. Like always. I'm very much looking forward to that deck.
Have you found a deck that breaks that? Because I haven't seen one.
Not yet, but give them time.
I mean, I think Zoe's a 1-drop though, so you're not committing that much by playing Zoe, and she might not level up every game, but it is a 1-drop. It's kind of like, like Teemo. Once he's getting removed, he's already doing his job in many ways. And sure, maybe the dream for a lot of champions is for them to level up every game, but that's not going to be the case. I think everyone knows that playing Runeterra. And the fact that you have the Invoke package, like playing an Invoke control deck, it's very doable to play 10 cards very quickly because you get to kind of create unique cards and very cheap ones as well, with things like Spacey Sketcher, with gems as well, a lot of create cards that synergize. But I think it's not that crazy. I think Zoe was definitely the most underrated champion coming into the expansion, at least from the survey I did as well. And I think it's going to find some success, especially because she fills a slot. Both her and Victor fill a slot that there wasn't in the game before. When you wanted to play, I don't know, some kind of crazy Pursuit of Perfection deck, there was no champions that went with that game plan. Now there are create champions that benefit from that. So I think they filled up an open slot. And I think what Ruben was saying about the champion like dream of having a deck for each champion, and a lot of cards that were underused in PNZ as well, with like Trail Evidence, for example. Now they have a home in this like create mechanic kind of deck, which isn't a lot of create mechanic archetypes, and many card games are always broken and very RNG heavy. Well, this is not the case at all. So I think it's, too early to say if it's strong or not, but it's definitely finding a viable spot in the meta. Both Zoe and Victor, even though they might not be the strongest, and Riven might be a bit stronger.
Okay. I haven't had that experience with Zoe, but I would love to see a list that's actually gonna level, because I just want to see Zoe have the capacity or capability of actually leveling up with some consistency. Just
So
some. Most of
Kuvira,
my games I've played, and I've played about 40, I guess, with Zoe now. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 where she leveled up. Like, not very many. It doesn't mean I didn't win, but she never levels up. So that's just my perception is I don't really care if it's always competitive, but I want a way for it to level up a little bit more consistently, because like over time, yeah, sure, you played her as a 1-drop, you didn't commit too much, but she also has, well, from my perspective, she just has never, like, would it have been better for me to play a Teemo, or would it have been better for me to play something else? Okay, obviously Teemo doesn't really do the same thing, but yeah. But like, is there something else in that slot that I would rather play? Is the question.
If you want an example, Kavira played in the EU Giants League tournament yesterday.
Yeah.
He's a French player. He played a Zoe Invoke control list with Shadow Isle Splash with Atrocity and a few other cards. And it's a deck that existed before, and I've seen it on Reddit posted, and some pro players have played it in some tournaments. And there wasn't a clear champion. It was kind of Leona Acel, and you had to go into that very late game heavy control package you sometimes didn't want to do because you had more Eclipse Dragon as your top end. And now Zoe fills in that early curve, and she fits with the deck as well. If you want to check out that deck list, I can send it to you later, but it's a pretty good take on it, I think, as well. And I've seen Zoe Victor decks. I think Precipic played it in the NA tournament as well.
Yeah.
So there's a few different options that even pro players are committing to in tournaments as well.
Okay.
Yeah, this list was created by What Am I, actually, an NA player. He got into the top 32 on the seasonal. A very, very great and consistent player. So Kuvira kind of net decked that from What Am I. What Am I is already in Masters on Americas. I don't think that he made his whole run with that Eclipse deck with Zoe, but part of it was using that deck and that champion. I was one of these people who kind of underrated Zoe. She's kind of nice. I think the more I play her, the better I like her. And I'm playing her right now on an elusive deck using Ionia and Kinko Wayfinder. I think that is the name of the 4-drop Allegiance card from Ionia. I'm seeing kind of success with it. My win rate is pretty good until now. So yeah, you played Zoe just for the value. It's a 1-drop that it's elusive. It's hard to block it, and she's generating value every hit. You need to remove her from the board, and if you commit your removal, you don't have the removal for bigger threats. So yeah, I kind of like Zoe, and if she deals 1 damage and he draws you 1 card, I think that she just paid off what you spent to get her on the board. So yeah, I like Zoe a lot now that I'm testing her. Actually, I think she's in a great spot. Yeah, that there is this issue that that she does not level up frequently.
That's the only thing I have.
Yeah.
Like everything else, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there is that. I think you got a point.
Yeah, Zoe is definitely weirdly almost like backwards with a lot of our design philosophy around like champions being viable, because like very competitively, like 4LW was saying, like Zoe, you connect with it once, you're at an advantage no matter what, and Zoe costs 1, so there's no card in the game that is going to get a favorable trade. Yeah, you can like meme about go hard, right? But turn 2 Zoe with Pale Cascade is going to get through every time. And there is like the sort of like weirdness where Zoe's almost like not leveling up. Somebody pointed out in chat, which is like, I definitely agree that a lot of our champions are all about that level 2. And Zoe's actually this weird, like spiky, like value card that reminds me of a lot of cards from different card games where you like get a bit of tempo and card advantage early off of it and sort of snowball that advantage. So it's definitely interesting to see like where that lines up.
Indeed. It's fascinating. I really like that. I really like your champion design. And I'm not a player. I don't play League of Legends, so I have no idea about all these champions. But I heard there are very many. And I'm really looking forward if you bring more of them to Legend of Terra, or which ones. And one question: are you designing champions which are Legend of Terra exclusive, or is it only old ones converting to the game?
Our general philosophy has been to, get characters from the Runeterra universe that already exist into lore. And, we've been continuing to do that. A lot of the sets that people see coming out now, have been in development for a long time. And I think that, given that sort of frame of, okay, we're developing way in the future, a lot of the champions are trying to hit people's favorite champions from League of Legends. I think at first we hope to get all the champions in eventually, which hopefully will be true. But yeah, currently we're going with that. That said, we have seen some interesting stuff where like new champions are coming out in League of Legends, and they're becoming popular. And our development pipeline is so far ahead of time that it's hard to get some of those champions in. So we've been doing some stuff, and I'd expect to see some shakeups moving forward. Though in general, we're probably going to continue to do champions that exist. That said, it definitely isn't out of the realm of possibility that you'll see that there'll potentially be crossovers, even League of Legends coming from lore, potentially, if we did something like that. That's something I think that we kind of aspire to eventually work towards.
I
Oh.
I have another question that's kind of adjacent to that one, and it might seem a little bit much, but you said when we keep on adding new champions to the game, I was under the impression that there were going to be set rotations added to this game, and if so, how would that work in this game? Because there's a whole set of champions. It's not exactly the same. Are we still expecting set rotations or not really?
So we do have plans on having some form of what people. I'll just define it for people because I don't know if everybody knows what rotation actually means if they're new to the genre. Basically, it's the idea that eventually there will be some sort of almost like a ladder reset where all of a sudden cards that exist are no longer playable. I can say that we have explored versions of rotation, and we will have some mechanism for that in the future. I can't really reveal any details around that right now, other than there will eventually be some form of rotation, and it's very likely that it'll be coupled with an ability to still play all the champions that you own and love, and potentially have some of them still exist in the ecosystem. So I wouldn't. It's a great question, but not one that we're prepared to sort of reveal exactly what our plans are quite yet.
I could imagine that you do something unique, like you often do. It's something I really admire or like about Legend of Terra. You're trying to go new ways. If it's about how you release expansions or how you do your free-to-play model, you're willing to say, okay, let's try how this works and let's try something new. Not just copying what other people or what other games did before us. So that's
go ahead.
Hsuku.
I was just gonna say, I know you have your pedigrees in Magic the Gathering, right, Ruben?
Yeah, I guess you could say so.
I guess. Okay. Were you with Legends of Runeterra since the beginning?
So yeah, this is interesting. So there's there's a few things I want to see here. The first is that there have been many different versions of what players see as Runeterra. When a game, especially at Riot, is in development, it might go through a lot of different stages. So I would say that I haven't been there since the beginning, where at different points in time, different projects were scrapped. Different people came off the team. But I will say that probably I first worked on the project around 4 years ago, and in terms of like people on the team, I'm probably one of the oldest, or sorry, what's the word? Not oldest, but
most veteran.
Yeah, most veteran member of the team. And the second thing, and this is something that maybe I don't want to take this as like a personal hour, but I see a lot of people say, that oh, it's great that Riot chose RubinZoo to do this thing. And I think that not that almost takes away a little bit a lot of the hard work that I've done to sort of like, become a game designer and develop the entire system of like LoR's live design, because that really came from, what I felt as a player, and then kind of learned as a designer how to implement that. So definitely, yeah, like my Magic pedigree helped me get a position at Riot, but a lot of like the work that I've done has helped me excel and eventually become the live design lead. Hopefully that resonates and makes sense with people, but I just wanted to throw that out there, since I see it that on Twitter all the time, and it's great that people love that I've been a Magic pro and stuff. But there's been a lot of hard work, and not just from me, from a lot of people on the team who might not even get as much accolades and recognition. So just wanted to shout out to the LoRCompetitive team as well.
I was actually using that as a lead-in question. I for something else. Do you follow Magic? So you know about the London Mulligans?
Yeah, I follow Magic. I think I was actually in the Pro Tour where the London Mulligan was first implemented.
So did you guys ever consider a different mulligan way of mulliganing in the game? Like, how did you guys decide to um, like your mulligan strategy, your mulligan style is very different from how Magic is kind of evolving over time now. Um, do you guys foresee keeping it like that in the future?
In terms of different things that we've thought about, we've had different almost systematic level changes where like, hey, maybe champions are things that like kind of start in your opener, stuff like that. In terms of the sort of like selecting and replacing cards, I think that that's kind of the gold standard for a reason. It gives you a lot of agency, and of course we've built lore on the idea of having a more skill-based digital TCG is one of our big bets. We have thought about potentially, and this is actually kind of an issue, and you might even see it in this expansion with created cards, of actually starting with less cards in hand. That would be the big change. Like we've tested out like doing one less card in hand. Card flow is very high in our game. Like you basically are sharing a turn, so you're drawing a card each round, right? And with a lot of created cards and value cards, you end up in tons of situations where players have 8 to 10 cards, which, I bet a lot of people in chat or watching, who are highly engaged are like, well, this is awesome, right? I have so many cards, but it actually is a big headache because, it gives a lot of decisions that might not necessarily be easy for a lot of players to navigate. So we did definitely think about potentially reducing the cards in hand, because also another weird thing to say is that more cards in hand creates less variable gameplay, which is like, and I expect a lot of people that are probably watching to be more on the competitive side and be like, well, why wouldn't we start with 10 cards in hand? Like there should be the least variance in gameplay. But it's really actually important because games need to feel different, right? Like if your opponent has Zed on round 3 every game or whatever, like things become very solved. And that's actually been a problem with our game with the high resource flow, is games playing out in the same way. I think that, we have, sorry, this has been a lot more than just answering the question, but basically there's a lot of thought that goes into just like those kind of decisions, like what does card flow look like, early cards. But yeah, in terms of changing it, I think it's highly unlikely we'll ever change it outside of maybe like reducing the number of cards that you have. But yeah, we've been in a pretty lucky almost that sort of the go first, go second isn't as big of a deal in our game as it is in many other games, which has mean the mulliganing is pretty fair and something that we probably won't mess with too much.
Cool. Thanks for that.
It was very interesting to hear. So you said you designed a live design pipeline, Rubin?
Mm-hmm.
So what does this exactly mean?
So yeah, essentially the way that we see patches in Legends of Runeterra has been kind of developed out by myself in terms of, what works for their community and also what I think is good for card games. And what's been kind of interesting is to see other card games emulate the way that we're doing it after that we do it, which is always kind of a nice internal validator to have. But essentially, that 1 month patch cycle that is weirdly kind of new to digital CCG space, as well as sort of our focus on doing super buff heavy stuff where we actually prefer to buff things as opposed to nerf things. Normally, you'll see like 2 to 3 big nerfs in a patch and then just buffs, because we generally think that just opening up the meta by taking away some unhealthy things and then boosting up underplayed stuff is the better way to go. And then just even how it all works internally. Like there is a lot, and I think a lot of players have experienced this on the negative side where it's like, man, why has this card not been changed yet, right? It's been 2 weeks, it's been 4 weeks, and getting whenever we change a card, we need to go through QA and I need to code it and we need to localize it in like the 20 different languages that lore is in, and oftentimes, the end result is a lot smaller and slower than players expect. So just kind of building that system and hopefully of trust with players that, yeah, we're going to hopefully patch, every month when we can, and we're going to try to make the best experience for players. So just that whole system was sort of developed out, last year. And I think that towards even the end of the year, it's been getting better and better. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
That's interesting, thanks. So, Hsuku mentioned before that Targon's Peak is a card he has a lot of fun with. But it's also a card which is found very divisive. If I look at Reddit or Discord, people are very, divided about the huge RNG swings caused by this card. For W, did you play with the card or did you see it in tournament even? Or is it just something you saw on Letter sometimes? And what are your thoughts about the card?
I didn't mess with Targon's Peak yet, but I watched some great players using it. I'm not the biggest fan of that card because of the big RNG factor that is involved. Although there is some, I think that Hsuku said that this card can be played too early in the game, but I think that if you are spending your whole turn 3 and turn 4 to ramp and then develop Targon's Peak, you're already very exposed, and this is kind of a balance already for this kind of card. So is Grand Plaza and the like, because if you go for that line, you're very exposed to aggro strategies. Although, combined with Targon and Star Shaping, and maybe you're splashing through George as well, so you have Catalyst and etc. So you can gain some HP back. But I think that the fact that you need to spend your first turns to develop that card kind of balances it, and the structures, the landmarks in general. But I'm not the biggest fan of Targon's Peak specifically. I like the other landmarks. I like a lot the Grand Plaza. I don't think that you need to nerf it in some way. I like it. Yes, it can be very strong, but it is a landmark. It gets to occupy and space on your board, and you can draw several copies of it, etc. So I kind of have an issue with Targon's Peak, though.
I have to say that's a good point you make. I really love this design about landmarks, that they are taking away one spot on the board. The board is already pretty small with only 6 units, and losing one of the spots to a landmark, can really feel punishing. Especially with something like Grand Plaza, which is very board orientated. You want to get a lot of units on board. It fills up so fast, and then right now we see it often in Undying decks, and Undying is already a deck which has problems with space and board, because you get the Undyings, you get the Curse Keepers, you get the Chroniclers, and and drawing 2 Grand Plazas can feel very punishing. I agree with that. It's a good way how to balance it. Really nice. Panda, do you have what are your experiences with Targon's Peak, and how do you see this game swinging RNG effect some people complain about?
I haven't played it personally, but I have seen obviously where it fits in the ramp archetype with Acel and what used to be Tron Tryndamere, and kind of that, with Field of Rush getting discounted to 0 could be very impactful, for example. I think it's not so much the cost that's the discussion, if it should be more expensive for the effect to give. It's more the effect itself, because it can be a very polarizing effect. And it doesn't mean it's necessarily competitive, because statistically, maybe it's not going to hit, Feel the Rush every time, and you're going to feel like, oh, well, this card sucks. But when it does hit, and you're the player playing against it, you definitely remember it. So it's a card that it's kind of like Nab. When it came out, it was strong, but not maybe the strongest thing in the world. But it was still nerfed, and it was still a problem because of the perception and how it felt to play against, and just felt really bad. I think Targon Speak is kind of in the same camp. It might not be very strong, but the games it does get this crazy high roll where you kind of Hearthstone, and get this like very crazy RNG, which there are some cards in Legends of Runeterra that have RNG and variance, and it's needed in card games for the most part, but they don't have that big of a variance, that big of a swing. Whereas Targon's Peak is maybe the first card in my memory that really has that very, very high roll upswing, which could be maybe countered by the fact that it's set it up and costs quite a bit of mana, but it can feel devastating in some games. And we'll see if it's played enough and if it's impactful enough and like the perception and the meta to be a problem. But it's definitely like, I think the first card that enters that, subsection of cards that could be like very, very high rolly and very problematic, I think.
Yeah, I think that the Targon's Peak is clearly sort of designed to not necessarily be a competitive card, and the issue that we might be seeing is that it actually is like pretty good, which maybe has taken us by surprise. A lot of times different cards are tested in development. Like I think Feel the Rush in particular might be a card that didn't really get tested with it because of just like the weird, the KDA drop being kind of its own thing that we created. And I was playing this a bit on ladder, and yeah, I think that there is definitely a potential for this card to be a bit. What's the word here? Because I think that it's okay for a card to be strong, though. If Targon's Peak was like the tier 1 deck, right? I think that that's where we kind of get into problems. I think that it's actually awesome that in lore, like a lot of the lower kind of tier decks can put up a fight often. We see that a lot with different weird champion combinations or, just different variants on decks using sort of different approaches. And I think that's something that you can kind of see with when you look at the metadata around how many decks are played. So I think in theory, like it's awesome that Targon's Peak is viable. And it's cool to see a lot of the landmarks in this release really hit on players, because landmarks are very interesting for us, because a lot of the times, like 4LW was saying, like just the natural tempo loss of them often makes them really hard to use, and that you're splitting hairs with the like one more mana. Like I think the example of like Vault of Helia being like, I'm pretty sure that if it was 4 cost, it would just be absolutely disgusting. Like we had that tested out, had to make it 5. And I think that, in general, I think the landmarks are doing well, though we'll have to keep an eye on Targon's Peak, because if that stays strong, then or becomes like really, really decisive for the meta, then that's something we might have to think about adjusting. That said, I think Hsuku also had a good point where it's like it is almost self-balancing, right? Like I've playing the Targon's Peak deck. Even if you build your deck around Targon's Peak, sometimes depending on the matchup or the texture of your hand, you literally just can't play it because you will lose. Right? So it's definitely a kind of card that, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about, but I think in terms of like super, we'll just have to see what happens with it, basically. But I am happy that a card like that can be viable.
On the flip side, I have also played Targon's Peak, and the very next turn, my opponent plays Aurelion Sol. And I'm like, oh, that's not what my intent was when I played the Targon's Peak. And so there's a level of fun that your opponent can also have with Targon's Peak. It's not there. It might be that there's a small or a roller coaster of emotions while you're playing this, but I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing. I have found, though, to counter Panda, Panda said like the RNG involved. I feel like you can control your hand quite well. There's some, you don't necessarily have to play Freljord. You could play something like Discard and ensure that one very particular target is, or one of 2 cards gets hit by that Targon's Peak. It does mean you're not going to get it on 4 on turn 4. You'll be getting it on 5 though. That was just a quick addendum.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm wondering, Ruben, so the last expansion we saw several cards coming in with some kind of, I mean, the invoke mechanic itself is kind of RNG, though it's in a very interesting kind of RNG, and that's something I like, because it's you can calculate, you can think about it. So I would like to see more, personally would like to see more invoke cards which you can get certain mana cost So I know that these tend to be the strongest because you can plan and go exactly for what you want. It's a very delicate balance you have to keep, but something I really enjoy. But then you have Azor, and Azor levels up and gives you 3 living legends in hand, and it's you think, oh wow, this is fun for me, but not for my opponent maybe. It's Panda also said that we need RNG in card games to keep them exciting, and like you said, not every game should be played the same. But especially competitive players tend to like less RNG. I mean, the Hearthstone comparison is never far away, and people very early start crying about that. So what are your thoughts about that? So do you think your design is? Do you plan to do more like that, or do you think it's good like it is, and we do similar things in the future?
I think that Invoke is actually a very good version of the sort of internal variance. I think that maybe, especially, we did do some. I think after our change to Living Legends, I'm actually surprised. I think that like it was almost over nerfed and now is like kind of close to not being good at all ever. Which I think is kind of a good thing because before you could kind of bank into it and like on round 7 like have some insane turn that you shouldn't be allowed to have. That said, I think that it's kind of interesting that you bring up competitive players not wanting RNG, and I might get flamed for this, but it's actually there's this thing where it's like I think that a lot of competitive players and super high level TCG players like kind of understand this is a thing and work within the parameters of RNG and do the best that they can to maximize outcomes. Like obviously Magic has lands is like the big example, and like people complain about mana screw all the time, but generally top players don't because they're playing thousands of games, they're making the right decisions to minimize their chances of getting hit. And sometimes when the thing happens, and it's like it's almost worse to complain about it because then that's when the tilt comes in. I think obviously in lore we've done a lot to minimize RNG with spell mana and mechanics like Invoke, where instead of getting random cards, you're getting from a specific pool. And even somebody in the chat pointed out Make It Rain, which yes, Make It Rain is definitely RNG, but we kind of like it because it's adaptable. Like you pretty much you can create a situation where it's optimal. Obviously, there will be some situations where it might be deciding the game, like later on in the game when you kind of snipe with it, which is a bit of a problem. But I think that in general, like, yes, competitive players say they don't want RNG, but I think that like there's the sort of like chess analogy where it's like, well, when there's no RNG, that's chess, and then a lot of players like actually wouldn't want that. So there's definitely a balance for the designers to figure out how much we want to do, and that's why on lore we go with cards like Invoke. I also personally think Avaros and Trapper is actually another good example of RNG because it forces your opponent to think, okay, like if they drew a Yeti this turn, should I open attack? Well, if they don't draw a Yeti, how much value am I getting out of developing? And maybe they didn't draw it this round, etc. So I think that what we do is we kind of really push on adaptability and the idea of like when an RNG effect happens, we don't like, I guess the word we sometimes use is like it is the sort of post commit RNG where it's like, I play a card and the random thing happens afterwards and there's nothing I can do about it. We like the like, I kind of do stuff early, like I invoke to get a specific card, I play my Trapper to set up, I play my like Barrel or whatever, like Go Hard to set up my Make It Rain. Well, those cards aren't in the same deck, but you kind of get what I'm saying, where like we actually really like it when it's a lot more testing. Because it does give us that variance, and it even gives those players that might say, hey, I hate this, like some satisfying plays because they get to kind of do it the right way. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And in terms of like ASO Living Legends RNG, I think a lot of that by that point in the game, I've definitely had a tilting experience before where like my opponent has like made a Crescent Strike off of an ASOL and they would be otherwise literally dead if they hit anything else. And that is obviously happens, but I think the later that goes into the game, like the more forgivable it is. That's a pretty long answer, but hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
I think the biggest difference, and what you're mentioning, a lot of the cards that are RNG have, maybe 3, 4, 5 different outcomes, and you can control the, situation to make them have even less outcomes, like Make It Rain, for example. But the problem with Targon's Peak, in my mind, is that the outcomes are so different, and what like the variance between the best outcome and the worst outcome, especially not just in your hand, but also in the matchup you have. If you're playing against someone that's playing a deck with Draven and the axe gets hit for the discount, for example, there's many situations, of course. You have to see how it plays on the meta and what kind of decks and what kind of situations are created. But that's my problem, where Target Speak is maybe the first card that has this enormous disparity between the best and the worst outcome, whereas Make It Rain doesn't have that, whereas Aberros and Trapper, you either draw it the second turn or you draw it the third turn. That's the difference. It's not that much bigger. Whereas Target Speak has the potential to create a huge window that is what makes things feel so bad. And Nab was the same. Whereas Nab, they nab your one Rem Nation, and like, oh, it happens once every 20 games, but you're going to remember that, and it's going to feel really bad as a player as well. That's the only thing I think Treasure Trove is the other card that has that very crazy RNG, but there's so much setup and playing deep, Treasure Trove, what it hits doesn't really matter in the end for the most part. But that's another like the only two cards I think that have that possibility to have those two like really crazy outcomes.
Yeah, I can see that. It's I'm curious. We will see in the future, I think, how the card plays out, how the deck plays, and if there's some nerf needed or not, how consistent it will be. It will be fun for sure. But I think we talked enough about RNG for a while now. I mean, I'm coming from Duelist, so for the people who don't know Duelist, it was a CTG with a board like chess. So we had a lot of people who really were into hating RNG because we are on a board playing our cards on a board and moving around, and it's very important that we don't like RNG. It's like chess a little bit. The chess comparison is kind of fun. So maybe I'm more sensitive to it, that I see it easier in Reddit and so, because in my experience as Duelist moderator, I had to deal a lot with people really, really getting upset about any form of RNG. So, yeah, good times. But we were in, but what
Sorry.
Hsuku, say something.
I was just going to note that Panda really doesn't like Targon Speak.
No, it's really not that. I mean, I think it's a fact that if you're looking at it from a rational perspective, which I think I adopt looking at card games, it's something that's never going to worry me. It's never going to bother me, and I'm never going to ask for a nerf. But from the perception, I understand why it would feel bad and why people complain about it. But it's a card that creates a situation that might feel bad. I think, like Ruben was mentioning, very skilled players are very aware of what RNG is and why it's added to card games and why it exists. Because if not, like Ruben said, with a 10-card starting hand, you'd get bored out of your mind. You'd be playing like robots and playing the same exact game every single time, 500 games in a row, and maybe you'd be top one on ladder, but it wouldn't be a fun experience. And the game, it might cater, I think, balancing-wise towards like Plat, Diamond, Master subsection for balancing, but it's a game that has to be fun in its principle. It has to, the competitive amount of the players that are very competitive and really are very vocal is a top 1% on Reddit. And there's so many casual players that play this level at gold, plat level. The game also exists for them, and balancing only towards the most competitive isn't necessarily always correct. It's also perception and fun as well. And Target Speak is a fun card, I understand that, but when it steps into the boundary of also being competitive, that's where the problem might arise, because people might have a very high play rate in competitive settings and tournaments, and then it really feels bad to see. Maybe as a caster, seeing a player that has Feel the Rush and something else, and if he hits Feel the Rush, he wins the game. If it doesn't, he loses. And if that happens in many games in a row, then the card's going to feel bad to have in the game. I think that was my only. I wouldn't say to nerf it at all, ever, but I understand why some people might.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah, yes, like I said. I mean, that's also the reason, like I said, that we don't want to play against robots. Every game is the same. That most chess players I follow on Twitch and stuff, they always play blitz chess. They only have 3 minutes for the whole game, because then you can't think through every play, and then the game has variance and it's different every time. And I thought that's really interesting. That's how chess tries to be, different from every game. Make it different, not calculable. Okay,
really short amount of time for chess. I mean, I haven't played in a while, but 3 minutes seems really short.
Yeah, it's fascinating how it goes, and then you just have to go with your fear. Not fear. I mean, it's your experience, of course. You see pattern, you know what to do, but you can't sit there for 20 minutes and think about all the patterns, everything which can happen. That's how many people who play chess every day, keep it alive or fresh for them.
Okay.
And that's what we have RNG for.
Ruben, don't get mad at me. I need to be serious about one thing for you. I need you to hear me out. Add
Okay.
more slots.
I've heard it all.
Add
Go-
more deck slots.
Yeah, deck slots is definitely something I see a lot of players talk about, and it's kind of weird because, okay, first off, I'm not an engineer, so if I say something really stupid, please don't hold it against me. But my big understanding is that the reason that we have a cap on decks is just to improve the performance of everybody's clients, loading in everything. Less decks is just like less overall data, and that lets everything run smoothly. I do think that like the deck slot thing is interesting, like from a design perspective, because my brain says like, what even happens when you add 10 more decks? My guess is the people that have trouble with a 30 deck cap are going to have a trouble with a 40 deck cap, because it's just like, basically what I'm getting at is like, I'm not sure if the fix is like, we have to add a lot of decks, I think, to fix it. And I think that we kind of have it implemented the way it is so that we have the best performance we can on all sorts of min-spec devices. So I definitely feel you on that one as somebody who has like scrambled through my decks, even in like internal team play tests where we have all these different branches and tons of decks on them. So yeah, I agree that like it definitely is something we maybe want to do, but I'm not sure if adding 5 or 10 more decks is going to satisfy that player who is deck capped. I think they'll just still be deck capped and then complain about it. So yeah.
So going back to, I don't want to talk about Duelist anymore, but like I had 2,000 decks in there. There was no deck cap. And
But
so
you broke the loading screen.
I can just try small little iterative changes through my decks, and then I can make comparisons and charts and stuff like that. And I don't have to use an external tool to do that. So here, if I had to record my the deck codes on a separate tool, and then I can put in my win rate and stuff like that on the side, and I always had to keep on importing and erasing to make room for it. It's just a thing of convenience for me. Obviously, it's not the most important thing in the world. I just mentioned it because, come on.
Yeah, I'm not the best person on the team to ask about something like this, but I will say that this is actually just a classic like trade-off situation. Though I think that maybe the solution is easy if we get engineers to noodle on it and whatnot. But I think that it's always a give and take. Like when we work on a certain feature, we work on a certain aspect of the game. That kind of means we're not getting something else.
Yeah.
And I think that we've heavily prioritized what we think is the best thing for players.
Of course.
And obviously, well, your feedback is noted, and I talked to the team about it, and maybe eventually we'll get there. Especially when we have like over 100 champions in the game, it might be nice to have more than 30 deck slots.
That wasn't
sure.
a super serious statement. I'm okay with there being 30. I would prefer more, but yeah, thanks. Thanks for hearing me out.
No
We'll
problem.
make it do. But Hsuku, to be honest, you when you started a game in Duelist, you broke the loading screen there with your 2,000 decks.
I didn't have to mention that. Yeah, I did.
It only showed the first 100, 200 decks or so, I think.
240, I think. It was about 240 decks.
Oh.
And then I had to filter in order to find the others.
But the reason was that you
find a deck with this and this and this and this. Oh man.
Okay. So chat wants me to talk about Region Pi. So it's this question for you, Ruben, but I'm not sure what they want to hear. Maybe how the region are divided and which region are played most. That's what I understand on the Region Pi.
I haven't really looked into it too much. There's a lot of churn with the recent cards, though. Region Pi, from a design perspective, is like what can certain regions do and not do. And for that, I don't know if that is exactly the question, or if we're onto the sort of like design segment of our talk, or not. But yeah, basically in Runeterra, each region has things that they're strong at. They have like major mechanics, which are like keywords. Like obviously, an example would be something like Challenger in Demacia. And then they have weaknesses, so things that they're not necessarily good at, like, Demasia's Challenger, but they can't really draw cards. And we basically have a internal region pie that pretty much has the identity of each region. The one thing that I think trips up players a lot is that we bend the rules a little bit with champions, because we want champions to be exciting. And I think a really good example is like Lux, who is the classic story of like the mage who's like hiding in Demacia, and that she's got all this spell-based stuff, but Demacia really doesn't care about that. And the kind of way that we have that implemented in game is sort of, we have cards like Remembrance or even Reinforcements, not that they're necessarily the most competitive cards, but these sort of like spells that are actually like summoning soldiers or buffing your units to kind of get around that. So hopefully that's I don't know what the specific region pie question is, but yeah, we do basically have a region pie like you see in other card games, like Magic famously has their 5 colors and what they can and can't do.
And that's how we are in the design part of the talk. I wonder, what do you think is a question to everybody. What is the strength of Legend of Runeterra design-wise for LW?
What was the question again, Bora?
What is the strength of Legends of Runeterra in the design-wise? What did they do in a very good way? What you have maybe not have seen before, or which they maybe have done better than other games?
Yeah, like I said, Legends of Runeterra kinds of compiles a lot of good good of parts of different games. I mentioned Artifact, that was a kind of a pioneer in the card games aspect, that was this shared turns by both players, and Runeterra kind of implemented that very well with the simplicity that we see in Hearthstone, for example. So yeah, for me, the biggest strength of Runeterra is the depth that you can find in strategic in game, but it's kind of simple. You have champions that are very charismatic. You get very engaged and passionate about the game, but you don't give up on of the strategistic part of the game. I think that it's a very strong unified conception of things. I like it a lot.
And that's something you want to add to that, or your own view on the topic?
I think the strengths of Runeterra are pretty clear. I mean, it does a lot of things that are very innovative, and they work out. They're kind of these risks that maybe you think they wouldn't work out, but they have, like the spell mana, something that completely changes the way a card game plays, and so many of the flaws that so many card games have are fixed by this. I think Ruben mentioned it a bit as well before. The flavor, of course, is fantastic. I think from a design perspective, with champions already being in League of Legends and having a lore behind them, and then coming to a card game, and pretty much every single champion making sense from what you would imagine that champion would do in a card game. The design is fantastic in that regard as well. I think the balance has been great. The light design from Ruben and the team. There's no card game I play that's had such a diverse meta. There are, of course, some problematic cards, but eventually they get fixed very quickly. From my perspective, doing the surveys you mentioned earlier for the community, at the beginning, with the pre-Hecarim nerf and the Wraithcaller and Rasa and that kind of meta, there was so many cards that were kind of broken. It was, of course, the start of Runeterra. But nowadays, I almost don't feel like doing the surveys because all the cards are pretty balanced. So there's almost nothing to talk about, and there's very little discussion to be had, which is a good sign, of course. Just praise from me. I think it's a very good game, obviously, and the design has been great. I think Riot has a lot of resources as well to commit to designing or to patching and to balancing very regularly, to have huge expansion drops, 3 different expansion drops every 2 months with so many cards being added. The only thing I can complain about or think about is there's going to be too many cards like a year from now, and there's going to have to be rotations, etc. So definitely not a bad thing, of course. So yeah, overall, just positive thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah, that's but we got already hinted that some rotations are happening in some way. I have a feeling it won't be the traditional way we know, but something with a new twist on it. I'm very excited for that. Hsuku, what do you think about what are strengths or maybe weaknesses of the design in your opinion?
More than what I said before. I think it's mostly all been said. I mean, let's approach it from a different angle, from a development perspective, not just from the card design and stuff like that. Um, the game is a pleasure to play. Like originally when the client first came out, I believe it was locked at 30 FPS, if I'm not mistaken, and that was terrible. And immediately they unlocked it, like the first patch or the second patch or something like that. They unlocked it, and everything became so smooth and responsive. And I was like, every game should feel like this. I go to a different client. I'm not going to name any Magic client or anything, but playing Legends of Runeterra just feels better. That has nothing. I know that has nothing to do with Ruben. That's the engineering team that's on this, but it feels super good to play. Um, in terms of the way games play out, I love the stepwise, like how you take turns playing your cards. Every you kind of can see where you go wrong sooner along that path as well, because like every time you make a play, your opponent gets to do something. So there's it's almost like kind of like a step ladder. You can see where you might have missed something, or you can get a better assessment of how you can do better and maybe make changes to your own lists to try and make sure that doesn't happen again in the future, or you want something to happen again in the future. I think the way turns play out is honestly amazing. It's kind of like a mix between, I've always said, a mix between Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone. The simplicity of Hearthstone is very playable, it's very enjoyable to just play, but there's so much more depth in something like Magic the Gathering. Um, you kind of have a little bit of both worlds. Something I don't like. Oh, are we gonna? Okay. So burst. Burst is what I don't like. Especially with rotations not being in the game. So as more and more burst cards start populating the card pool, the card quality of burst seems to almost be quite up there with fast. I feel like a lot of people are taking out, or in the past they took a lot of fast stuff. Now I realize there are some benefits to fast, but they are few and far between. But because of that, since there are so many burst things, there are fewer opportunities to respond. And that was one of the big selling points for me on Legends of Runeterra, that ability to do something, put else something else on the stack. It's not exactly like Magic the Gathering, I understand that. But um, as more and more burst gets introduced into the game, you have fewer opportunities to actually respond, or the types of responses are very different. Um, and I think as that pool of burst cards continues to increase, there will be a tipping point where just things like Ionian Deny or whatchamacallit, Noblify or something like that, just you start running out of targets because you just never had to play it in the first place.
Yeah, Ruben, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally think that burst spells are amazing, right? Like we know very well, like Pale Cascade, sort of Sharp Sight, definitely change the texture of the game. I think in general, actually, that it's a situation where for a long time we didn't have burst, and I actually, when we first created burst, I was not on board. I thought that we were bringing interactivity out of the game, and that was a bad thing. In general, though, I think that burst has really grown on me as something that has made lore unique compared to other games that use stacks, because it really allows cards like pump spells to actually be competitively viable and makes every single combat dynamic a bit, which we don't really see in other games, which I really love. Like burst is really important just for the flow of the game. I definitely understand any concerns around like, yeah, I can't interact, but in terms of having to have so many clicks, and then your opponent has to click, we actually found that a lot of the times pump spells were actually not responded to, which is why one of the reasons we made burst in the first place, because it's like, well, if 90% of the time I play a sharp sight, and we both just have to click OK. It's really breaking the flow of the game. And actually, I don't really have much more to say other than like I totally understand, and we almost expect competitive players to not like burst, but it's sort of a thing that we think just helps games play faster and smoother and really reward proactivity, which is really important because, like we talked about earlier, how there are a lot of different versions of LoRCompetitive. I've played many versions of LoRCompetitive before burst, where one of the problems is that games just nothing ever happens because it's always incorrect to be the first. It's almost always incorrect in lore to be the first person to play something onto the stack. And burst kind of actually breaks that paradigm and allows you to do it in a positive way, which, yeah, sometimes it can be overpowering when your opponent has the sort of burst tricks, but it really lets players attack. And we really, as you can see with a lot of offensive keywords in our game, we really like the idea that players can just attack, especially new players, because you just run into those paralysis situations where players aren't really sure if they should attack it or not, and then they don't. And then you just have games that really take forever. So yeah, there's a lot there, and I totally empathize with the like, man, it really sucks that I can't respond to things. We just really think that like the pool of benefits is so big for burst spells that it's worth losing the interaction window.
Okay. I mean,
Asking,
can I ask?
go ahead.
Just there's one other card. The card just came out. It's in the 5 slot.
Moonlight Affliction.
The Moonlight
Affliction.
card.
That I just built the deck today. I just built a Moonlight Affliction deck today, and people not being able to block on an opening attack because it's burst seems like a really big deal. Is it just me, or do you see a because this is allowing burst damage all of a sudden. A game can end before you can actually do something. It's not like Warning Shot where it's just one damage and you can expect it, like you see it coming. Moonlight Affliction, I mean, I suppose you could expect it, but then you have to match tempo. So for something like Moonlight Affliction, different styles of decks, this is going to really break something, I think, just by virtue of the fact that you can just bypass different blockers right off the bat and just to always do face damage. Not always, but finish off a game without your opponent being able to do something about it. And that, for me, it's really this card that really highlighted it for me. And I wanted to talk more about burst and the direction of things like that.
Yes. So there's two different things here. The first is that like there's definitely cost and like investment, and there's obviously different I call it in my head axes of axes, I don't know the plural version apparently, of interaction, which is like, what can I do in response to a play? And if your play is like, okay, a Nightfalled, a Moonlight Affliction, so presumably you played 2 burst spells to do that, right? And you're making me not block. Like, what can I do? And I definitely think that there is interaction window still there, because while maybe I can't block with certain units, I might be able to block with others, or I might be able to cast spells from my hand to prevent that damage. So, but I think the one thing to note is that I'd like to talk about more is actually the sort of idea of like burst dealing damage, which was very interesting when Warning Shot we first made. We really went in between whether Warning Shot should be a burst spell or it should be a fast spell, because obviously damage to the Nexus is not something we ever want at burst, but could it be forgivable if it's just 1 damage? Because fundamentally we talked about a lot like, oh, I can always interact with what my opponent's doing, but they can Warning Shot us out, and it just made Plunder so much better and such more of a clean mechanic that felt good for that effect to be at burst speed, that we made it at burst speed. So I think that we are still sort of adhering to our restrictions, but can be a bit flexible with cards like Warning Shot and cards like Moonlight Affliction. So yeah, I personally don't see the problem outside of the like, yeah, this might be turning burst into damage, because I think there is a decent reaction window given that you're investing in Moonlight Affliction, because of course you have to Nightfall it. Also, there's the opportunity cost of having that card in your deck and in your hand, etc. So yeah, I think that it's probably okay, but I definitely want to touch on the like, yeah, if that's just dealing 5 damage to the Nexus always, like that's probably a problem, because we don't want 5 mana burst decimate. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't see the problem as well. You could say that this Hsuku said about like ash on the board and harsh winds. I think that this kind of card is fair because it presumes that you have a board to deal the damage. So if you know that your opponent is using Moonlight Affliction, you can reduce their board or something like that. You can make a bigger board so making 2 units not blocking, it's not that big of a deal. And yeah, I also don't see the problem with burst. I think that like Rubin said, it kind of gives a special flavor to Runeterra. The three speeds of spells makes Runeterra very unique, and being able to cast spells at burst speed, it makes from the strategic point of view, it makes the game feel very unique. You can set up your burst spells to the attack, or you can use things like fading memories, or the new card, what is called, I think it's called iterative improvement. This kind of card would be kind of barely playable if they were fast, I think, because you need you really need to get value at burst speed, so for very to be playable, I think, because like if you playing that kind of spell, you want to make a board, a presence on board when you need to. If you have a unit on board, or your opponent has a unit and you want to copy it and play the board, you can do that with burst. But if that kind of spell was fast, you would be, your game would be so much slower, and this kind of card for me would be unplayable. Yeah, I don't see that the problem as well. I'm with Robin here.
I mean, I agree with you on the fading memories and on the iterative improvement. Those don't do damage to face. My biggest limitation is where you limit interactivity and you can do straight damage to face. And so far, you're saying that, well, all you have to do is remove their stuff. Well, I mean, if you're maintaining tempo with your opponent, just assuming an exactly even board all the time, Moonlight Affliction guarantees 2 things hit face. That's like, as long if we live in a perfect world and everybody's maintaining tempo, then yeah, Moonlight Affliction will guarantee 2 hits to face. Now, it's not going to work out like that every time, of course not. And there is a cost to this, and there is going to be, not only that, there's a trigger. You have to do a Nightfall trigger for this. Because there are things like fading memories, it becomes a little easier, just a little bit easier. But yeah, that's been my experience so far. My deck with Moonlight Affliction, my Leona list with Moonlight Affliction, where I just stun something and then Moonlight Affliction and then I hit face, and I'm like, wait a second, they couldn't do anything. That was, it felt amazing, but I was like, wait a second, wait a second, something's wrong here. But yeah, anyway, that's just my that's from my experience today. Thank you for your perspective, though, Ruben. Appreciate it.
No problem.
I want to ask a question, if I may, changing the direction of the conversation a bit. I want to talk about the seasonal tournament, and we had some. I think that the tournament in general was very successful. The very competitive players in the community didn't really like the single elimination format with the 5 rounds, and if you lose one round, the best of 3 round, you're already out of competition. And the feedback to that was kind of negative from the competitive player base. And I would like to hear Robin thoughts about that, if there are plans to change that for the next seasonal tournament that is happening in February, if I recall correctly. And what kind of changes have you have in mind?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think later this year, or maybe there's going to be some end of year information from our publishing team around sort of like seasonal tournaments and like maybe what we're planning next year. So definitely stay tuned for that. So I'll try to not really spoil that and give my answer. I think from a competitive perspective, like, if I was playing in the tournament, I definitely empathize with the sort of like problems with best of one. I think it's very clear that is maybe not the exact best format specifically for like competitive players, and maybe going towards the like, okay, like if this is going to be the primary tester for who is the best player like each season, might not be the best idea. That said, I think the format we had was really clearly made for accessibility. Like, we wanted it to be short. We wanted any sort of player to be able to play in it, and also importantly, we had to ship this feature like pretty rapidly, I would say. I think that I'm really proud of the team that worked on it, because we got seasonal tournaments. If you asked me in April if we would do something like this, I would say no. So I think that like it's a good first offering, and I do agree that the format leaves a bit to be desired for competitive players. So I would say that, we're definitely going to look at it, listen to feedback, and figure out what's going to be best. Though I do want to temper expectations, like I was talking about with like, we might not have a balance patch for a while. Also, like, I don't know how much we can actually adjust that feature set for the next seasonal tournament. But I think like moving into next year, having 6 seasonal tournaments that we plan on having next year, I would be shocked if we didn't adjust the format at some point. Though I don't want to, I realize that might not be the answer that a lot of people were looking for. But I think like Andrew Yip, right, Umbridge actually tweeted earlier, since we've been a bit worried internally about this, because I think if we don't change it for the next seasonal tournament, it's not because we don't hear y'all. It's more that we're sort of, we're doing a lot of stuff. We're also on vacation, and there's just a lot to do. And the way that we shipped it made it very clean. Like, we wanted to make sure the experience, especially for any player who might have never played in a tournament before, was pretty straightforward. So I think we achieved that, and I do feel a bit sad about the outcome of the best of one sort of style. So hopefully that makes sense. Like, I definitely think that it's hard to argue against a more sorry, not best of one. I meant to say single
elimination.
Sorry, a version that is more forgiving and more typical for competitive card games.
I think you're underselling yourselves. That tournament was, as a first offering, amazing. Are you kidding me?
Thanks.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it being so well was also kind of making sure that we just had a clean system that was easy for all the thousands of players in 4 different regions. So like 4,000 players all getting able to play and have a good experience. But yeah, we definitely empathize with the more competitive players, and we're looking to serve them in different ways.
Yeah, I have to say, that's good that he came to the esports scene, because that's what I wanted to talk about next. The tournament client looked so clean, and it worked so well. And the question is, and which I got from the community, I saw it today. I thought it was a good question. Is it possible at some point? Is it thought that community events or community tournaments could use the client? That there's a way to organize your own tournament, if it be with your 3 friends from the neighborhood, or is it with like 200 people from your Reddit? Or do you have reserved the client only for your official tournaments?
Yeah, so at least unfortunately for now, I think that the tournament feature is, and part of the reason that it was so clean was we basically took a very simple structure and tried to apply that into a tournament. I think the hope might, aspirationally, eventually we might be able to have more community run tournaments. We worked really hard this year to actually get a friend challenge out to players, as well as spectator mode, to try and support these third-party grassroots tournaments, which at Riot, like, that's how League of Legends kind of eventually blew up. It wasn't because we created esports, it was because of these movements. But when we see interest in it, that's when we kind of serve it. So again, like, I don't want to disappoint people. I don't think that, at least in the near future, the feature will be usable. But we will continue to work on features like friend challenge, cross-region challenge, spectates for these sort of third-party tournaments that we've already kind of been serving in different ways. So basically, like, we kind of took our bets of like, okay, we're going to have the tournament this way, and then we're going to, support it with other tournaments with spectator and stuff. So yeah, I think it's a pretty big undertaking to make that in-client tournament system. And it boils down to the sort of like thing of like, oh, if we really spend on one thing, we're not going to get another thing. I think that I think a good example actually is Artifact, where I really liked Artifact, and I actually don't really talk about competitors often, but like, they had a really awesome tournament feature, right? And they spent a lot on that tournament feature being awesome, but then they had a lot of features that they were missing, right? And it's just the classic game dev thing. And we have a lot of awesome producers on our team. I think many of you might know or seen in Twitch chat Riot RubinZoo, who basically pretty much decides what our content team is working on. And it's like, yeah, when we put forth a lot of effort into things, we're not going to get something else. And that's why it's really important to get the player feedback that we get, because then we can decide what's best for everybody. So yeah, sorry, it's a really long answer. I don't think it'll be in client tournament mode anytime soon. Though also, I'm not the one deciding these kind of things. So it's kind of like a soft answer, and just listen out for our comms team to talk more about seasonal tournaments at the end of the year. There'll be something on our playruneterra.com. That's playruneterra.com now.
So now I know to send a message to if I want Zillion in the game, right?
So yeah, I mean, we may or may not be getting more champions next year. Spoilers, we will be. And definitely, we will see. This is sort of a side note, but I'm actually excited that, our next set is not actually spoiled. I think it's going to be a lot more exciting for players when they don't know like what champions will be in the release. Fingers crossed, anyway.
Absolutely. Panda, you casted the first big Riot tournament, the EU Masters. And then shortly afterwards was the first season tournament. I thought this is with the tournament in-game client, like we just talked about. Huge steps for Legends of Runeterra, in my opinion. Do you think the competitive scene has everything it needs now to blow off, or to go off, to really get big? Or what do you want to see? What do you think we are still missing?
No, I think it's pretty complete. When I last spoke to Ruben on the Progress Day podcast, which was back in June, July, I think he mentioned it before, that it was the case that there wasn't really much information about what Riot was going to do with esports. And for me, obviously, it involves me at a professional level. So I was very interested in knowing, what plans they had. And I understood they wanted to have a more grassroots approach and let the community develop itself. So I was very surprised to see everything that's happened in the past 3 months and how quickly it's all come to be. And I understand why there are some flaws. But yeah, very happy to participate in both. I think the EU Masters format was super innovative. The way the Riot Europe team decided to make it a country-based tournament makes a ton of sense for me. I think a lot of viewers, a lot of players might only and I think it's a problem with the complaints for seasonal tournament as well. They only think of the tournaments in their very narrow perspective of, I'm a competitive player. I want it to be rewarding for a player of my level and my subset. And that's all they think about really, when you have to think about many more factors. And the EU Masters highlighted the fact that the Runeterra community is still very small. The competitive community, it's not very well known. The biggest personalities in Runeterra aren't necessarily the players, the competitive players. It's more the content creators like Mogwai and Swim, etc. And the country-based format for EU Masters allowed viewers to root for someone without knowing who they are because they're rooting for their country. And that solved so many issues that a lot of esports have at the beginning. When there isn't really a community, you can do two things. You can invite known players from other games, which Artifact did, and that creates a very explosive and very maybe interesting first or second tournament, sure, but then it's not really creating a foundation for the competitive community and the relationship between the players and the viewers and creating a fan base, etc. And the way they did it with the EU Masters, I think it's making it very organic to create a community by itself, and the same with seasonal tournaments. So I think it was great. I think everything about it was nice. The format was a bit innovative and maybe not super competitive because it was 9 decks and it's hard to target a certain deck or create a certain lineup to target other lineups, but a fun event and definitely a memorable one. For seasonal tournaments, I think, like I mentioned, most of the complaints that have come in have been nitpicking, the format and single elimination, which obviously is not great. But like Ruben mentioned, a lot of the other parameters that people aren't thinking about are, how can we create a tournament that can resolve the qualification one weekend or one day rather, and resolve a tournament in 4 regions in 24 hours. And this was the way they made it. And to stream it and have 4 different broadcasts that don't overlap, that EU can wrap up in 7 hours and have NA in 7 hours. If you make a double elimination with 32 players, it's impossible. It would take, 10 hours or more. If you make the qualification Swiss, it would take 2 days and not just one, or it would take 10 rounds, which you can't maybe request that much time out of someone that's not committing to the game at a professional level, someone that's working, has a normal day job, and then plays Runeterra on the side. So I think there has to be, sure, you can slide the balance a bit towards it rewarding competitive players a bit more, but it was very clear what Riot's goal was with the first seasonal tournament, and that was for it to be very inclusive, for it to have a very big grassroots opening where 1,000 players are involved. Sometimes when there's an invitational tournament, it's going to be 16 players or 32 players, and the rest are all viewers, and it creates a very inorganic community. And this way, I think it's the other way around. And looking at the future of esports, it's the right way to do it, I think. Although I think, yeah, there are ways to maybe reduce the qualified players to 500 or so, and then instead of 5 rounds, make it 6 rounds, for example. And all the players that go 5-1 can have like a do or die round to end the qualified tournament. For example, there's many ways to do it to make it a bit more competitive, because I think it is maybe too like like we've seen one player losing and then they're just out of the tournament immediately. It kind of sucks. But it was a very good initial tournament for sure, I think.
Thanks for this long answer. Yeah, it was really fun. I didn't mean it in a bad way. I really appreciate it because you mentioned a lot of good points, especially the thing about changing a perspective, seeing it from the dev perspective, that you say, okay, we want to have a tournament with 1,024 people. How do we get it through in like 2 days? And then, yeah, it has to be single elimination. Otherwise, there's no other way, I guess. But I'm also hopefully seeing some, future tournaments with more players, with also maybe not that many players, but in a different format, different way, where the competitive players are happy too. But it's always a fine balance you have to keep between competitive players and the more casual players who also want to join a tournament once in their life or once every 2 months, because it's a great experience. I remember my first tournament and how amazing it was and how terrifying. And yeah, it's always, this is something which I really appreciate, that Riot made it possible for casual players to experience tournaments. Because usually it's always reserved for people who are already willing to do it, to go the extra step. You have to find a community tournament. You have to sign up. It's all not really a lot of work, but it's a little steps which adds to preventing some players from joining. Especially if they think, I'm not so good, I'm more casual player. No, go for it. And this tournament, how it was organized, it just did that. You qualified automatically, more or less, if you were hitting the right spot. But it was a lot of people could qualify. It was not only like 30 people, 30 players, and you think, 30, I can't make that. But you know what? Top 1,000, I can maybe, that's something I can do. And I loved it. And I also loved that the big names, they all got kicked out. I mean, the tournament winners in the end, they were, as far as I saw them, I didn't know their names before. And that's something I really liked about it. When the favorites were taking down. And it sounds kind of brutal, but
yeah,
I wouldn't see that as a good thing, that's for sure. I would see it's good to have variety, of course, but just to quickly mention what you're talking about in terms of the qualification system, these tournaments, what they want to do with single elimination is try and most accurately predict or find the best players in the game. That's, I think, what Ruben mentioned before. You want to see who the best players in Runeterra are for that season. Having it the way it was in 1 day, it's very hard to do that because you would have to play a much bigger sample size of games. The qualification, I think, was too broad in my opinion, because like you said, you qualified almost automatically if you're a Masters player, for example, in some regions, which I think if you make players dedicate more time to qualifying, you're already eliminating kind of you make the player pool smaller, and that makes it easier to find those best players in a way. You're making you don't have to play 10 games in a single elimination. You can play less, or in a Swiss format. So I would have liked to see just a smaller pool of players and a higher cutoff for Masters, where if you want to play a tournament, you don't have to dedicate, you don't have to play every single day of the season. It's not necessary. Just get to Masters and get 300 LP, which you can do playing casually over the course of 2 months. Like, it's more than doable. And I think I'd like to see Riot, catering a bit more towards still 500 players is a lot of players. I think any dedicated player that's Masters to your level or competitive player can get there. if he tries, but he has to try. I think qualifying without even trying means that you're doing something right. I think it's maybe a bit too open.
So I think it would have to be more than 300 LP. I think that was the cutoff this time, right? For at least
Depends on the region. EU was 130. I think Southeast people in Diamond were qualifying because there weren't 700 players in the region. So that's already telling me that, I think it's not as restrictive as it should be. I think there should be some effort put in if you want to compete in the biggest stage for the end of season tournament.
Okay. I actually like that there's a lot of people in the pool, because not everybody that is the best will actually be the most dedicated. That's not those two don't necessarily align directly. And getting a broader reach actually allows that. But also, I do agree single elimination isn't great. But does it have to be done in a weekend? Is my question. Can it be over the period of 2 weekends? Like you do your first set of rounds, and then next weekend you do another set of rounds? Because I like the broad reach, because then you can find people that maybe you didn't know, but are actually good. Just because you know somebody and you've seen them play doesn't mean that X guy that you've never seen play isn't good. That's not true. As you get more people in that pool, you'll get introduced to other great players. And I would like to see them be able to play. And that's for me. That's why when I saw top 1,000, that's there's a good number of people in there. The problem, of course, was single elimination. But if you need to do it in one weekend, then okay. But do we need to do it in one weekend?
Well, making the qualification more restrictive, you're essentially asking players to put effort outside of that weekend over the 2-month window. That's what it's doing. Essentially, you're asking this player to put his time and dedication to get to 300, 400 LP off stream and off, in that time window that Riot has to restrict themselves to because they want to broadcast it, they want to do it over 4 regions, etc. And by making it a top 500 cut, you're asking someone to say, hey, put in the time these last few weekends or the last full month to get to 400 LP, and then you're in the tournament. So you're kind of splitting that time, and you're creating a smaller pool of players, which creates overall, it rewards the better players more. And I think you have to find a balance where top 500 or 500 players qualifying, you're still not dedicating. It's not the most dedicated players. There's 500 players, a lot of players per region. That's 2,000 players in the world. That's a whole lot of players. If it would be restricted to 32 players, then it's maybe some players that are very good that don't have the time to play aren't going to be in the tournament. But at 500, if you're a competitive player and you're as good as you're saying these cases of some players that are very good that can't play, you have more than enough time to, over the course of a month and a half, grind to 300 LP or 400 LP. It's not impossible.
But isn't often the problem with not players who are top in Masters? They're really good, no question. But isn't it also a question of how much time they have to invest in the game? Card games always have something to do with grinding. So if you are like a student, then you have more, usually, not always, usually more time to play and to grind. If you are like a father with some, or a parent with some kids, and you have a day job, then you have like 2-3 hours in the evening. That's the problem I have with narrowing it down. I agree with you. You're right about your points, your good points, but also there's this other view that some people who are really good, they just don't have the time to grind it out.
But we're agreeing, because what I'm saying, I'm not saying to restrict the ladder qualification to the top, like you're saying, top 15 or top 20, which are good players, but players that grind like crazy, and they dedicate maybe not their entire time, but a whole lot of time to Runeterra. I'm saying to restrict the ladder qualification to top 300. Even if you're someone that's working full-time job, or like for LW, you're studying a degree, or you can find the time to grind up the top 300 over the course of a 2-month season, 100%, if you're a good player. So I think the restriction is sliding it a bit more restrictive, but not completely restrictive. You're still finding the spot for these players that are very good, that don't have the time to still qualify. It's not just the top 20 ladder players. It's a top 300, which is very inclusive still.
Very interesting. Ruben, what is your view on that? As maybe as a player, as an ex-pro, or also maybe as a dev?
So yeah, I mean, I kind of already went over this a bit. I would say that there's definitely room for us to have more exclusive tournaments, like what Panda is talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if we start thinking about things like what does LoR Worlds look like, right? Like, are there qualifications through seasonal tournaments, and stuff like that to sort of like take some of the variance out of the system. As a player, I think, I think I might be a bit disappointed if I only get one chance in one seasonal tournament to go like XO. I think that given that there's 6 next year and probably also some eventual format changes, I think that as a player, I think that's good. But there's always like, what's the next thing to qualify for? So I do agree with the idea that some sort of worlds or more exclusive like funnel for the top players would be great. Because I think one of the big goals of our seasonal tournaments is to actually, have players. We even saw like a Gauntlets player, I think was in the top 16 or top 8 of like NA, just like casually rocking Yasuo, which was kind of like awesome to see, right? So I think that those kind of stories that are created are give really positive experiences beyond the sort of super competitive player base who realistically, like we serve competitive players a lot, through live balance, through during tournaments. I think that they're often the most critical players, but sometimes it's important for us to serve like more holistically, which is what we kind of did with this tournament. But yeah, I mean, big agree on like, the format could use work. Definitely stay tuned for more stuff on that, since I can't really say too much. And I actually don't even know that much about it at this point. So yeah, I basically agree with everyone in that I do think it was well run and we hit a lot of the targets. But there's definitely room for improvement, and also like basically when is LoR Worlds happening? Hopefully we make it happen.
You answered practically a question I had too, because I wanted to know if you have more plans for something like World Championship, Pro Circuit Series, something like long-term evolving. But it seems like we have plans for that. But you can't talk about them.
In terms of plans, like I think we more have ideas, I would say. I don't want to say that we're doing something we're not doing. Like, we have an idea of like, okay, we have seasonal tournaments. We're going to iterate and improve those over time. What is that going to lead to? How is the sort of esports arc going to play out? So yeah, I mean, I think the team that works on those, Paul Heron is the lead designer, and I think that he's pretty well versed in getting the ball rolling up on the feature to sort of extend out. So yeah, I don't really have anything super specific to say other than that, like, we're thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks. That's exciting. So we're coming we're actually at the end of our stream, but I would love to have a short segment with some community questions, because I saw a lot which are really good. So they're mostly for Rubin, of course. But it's I think that's typical for them. So someone asked about 2 versus 2 tournaments. Are there plans for not tournaments, but a play mode that you can play with a friend against someone else? Are there plans for that, or?
So we are thinking of, in 2021, one of the things we're looking at is trying to make the game inherently more social, which is one of the problems we have right now. Outside of like if you're not a tournament player, like there aren't that many ways to sort of engage with other people in the community and have like game modes around that. So we're definitely exploring more game loads, like lab style stuff where you might be able to play, multiplayer is on the table, like co-op is on the table. Nothing specific that we can reveal at this point, but we are excited to deliver more social ways of playing LoR to players, hopefully starting next year.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. So you always, I saw a quote by you, and I think the quote said something like, let me look it up. Life balance in Legends of Runeterra is all about making sure that every champion's gameplay dream can be realized.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do that? Can you do it? Are you achieving that? Are you happy with, can you say this quote? Yes, I'm still behind that, and I think we are doing it. That was one other question I saw.
So I'm pretty happy with it. I think that one thing about the idea of like, we invest so much in champions through the artwork and the story and the design of like specific archetypes they go in, as well as the art and the VFX, everything all comes together as this one big package. And oftentimes, like, it's not actually live that's doing a lot of the work. It's sort of the downstream teams. But for us on live, a lot of the times it's almost environment based, where it's like champions can all have their own gameplay dreams. And yeah, like there'll be a lot of champions that won't necessarily be competitively viable, but you can still sort of like, you know, like Dawn and Dusk a Teemo or whatever and put like 1,000,000 shrooms in your opponent's deck, or you can still like maybe do some pop-offs with Karma. Like we really love those moments and want to make sure they're doable. And a lot of the times for live, it's almost making sure that, you know, the meta is open to allow players to experiment and to also prevent like really overpowering decks. I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that like, you know, there's just a lot of variety, and that almost speaks to a lot of different champions being used. We've done reworks in the past, though I think we're beginning to move a bit away from doing as many reworks because they're just frankly really hard to do and oftentimes don't necessarily hit the mark. But you know, recently we did revisit like Ezreal, for instance, where we have a gameplay dream in mind, though the one that existed before is just way too overpowering, and we did successfully, I hope anyway, rework him in a way where his gameplay dream can still be realized, but it's not kind of oppressive in ways that it was before. So those are the small things that we look at to sort of make bring up the whole picture. So yeah, I think that we did a pretty good job this year. I think that maybe live design actually might have a new sort of mantra. That's sort of our mission statement internally for next year, given that, you know, we're running into a situation where we have so many champions in the game and it's hard to sort of figure out what do we rework, you know, what do we just buff with numbers, etc. And eventual rotation does mean that, like, you know, if we rework a champion 1 month before something like that happens, then it's, you know, the amount of work put in might be better put elsewhere. So pretty long answer, but I'd say that I think we're doing a pretty good job just in terms of thinking of the diversity metrics and thinking of how much our champions are actually utilized across the board.
I would like to make a question on that topic to Robin. I would like to ask, what do you think about closed archetypes champions like Nautilus and Tankench, Soraka, etc. Champions that can be used only with specific interactions and with other champions with specific regions. They are very tied to other regions and they are not very flexible. What is your philosophy on that kind of development?
So yeah, we do this kind of pairing a lot in development where we pair up a champion, and one of the reasons that we do that is like LoR does this innovative thing where we release new regions to the game like every 6 months, which is kind of crazy to think about. It's not something that we actually see other games generally do, and part of that is actually attaching that new region to existing regions. Right, like basically, like when Bilgewater comes out, you know, what do I as a Demacian player get, right? And oftentimes, a really good way of doing that is having a mechanic like MF and Quinn, right, where all of a sudden, like, okay, this is what I'm getting out of the region, and that creates this sort of package, which is very new player friendly, where it's very clear and direct. Though I definitely think that we might have been doing this a bit too much. I think that a good formula for this is continuing to do it because there's a lot of design reasons. Sorry, I keep moving around. I don't know why. I don't know if that's bothering anybody except for me. But I think the good way is when one of the champions is flexible, when they're in one of those pairings. For example, I think that actually MF Quinn is a good example because MF can actually be used positively in a lot of other decks, which means you still get that awesome new like scout mechanic, really exciting gameplay, like kind of prescribed, but there's a bit of nuance there, and you can take it in different directions. You know, but then MF still is kind of a standalone champion, so I think that we should be doing that more. Whereas like the example you have with Maokai Nautilus is that, you know, you basically can't play those champions outside of TOS. And I think that I think Maokai might have ended up being a bit nerfed in development, but I think that our goal was for him to sort of be a bit more flexible. But it doesn't always play out the way we want. So yeah, my take is that I think expect them to continue to happen, though I think what good looks like here, basically because of the region tie-ins and just having really exciting new mechanics, because I think that actually Deep was one of our most successful mechanics ever. Just a really exciting thing that comes together. Like one of the big things about Deep is I think that players often have a really positive experience when they actually lose with the deck, right? Or when they're playing against it, where it's like, oh, yeah, they just got deep. There's this really powerful moment, like blood and salt, like, of course. And then you have the sort of like they start dropping these like huge dudes, and you either kind of like figure out a quick tempo to kill them or get overwhelmed, and it actually feels really good. So anyway, that aside, I think that kind of shows that we can create really good experiences when we do the pairings, though it does leave some champions kind of out in the cold. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation though, because at the same time, like for live design's perspective, a lot of the times champions play rate are down just based on numbers, right? I think that Hecarim, when he had 6 health, was just kind of an example of like, okay, we can very tactically change how many of these how flexible champion is based on what the most powerful champions are doing by kind of flattening out the curve. I think that so I don't know, maybe I kind of went off a bit like I always do, but I think we agree that we might be doing them a bit too often, though I think we're going to continue to do them because it's really important to tie those new regions into existing regions and create new stories. But yeah, maybe we want to make sure that at least one of the champions is flexible. That's when I think it's positive.
Thanks for that very long and detailed answer. It was very went very deep and very interesting. Really liked it. Another question from the community was, are there more irregular card drops planned like KDA, or was this a one-time thing?
Yeah, so actually we think that KDA was pretty successful in terms of disrupting the meta and in terms of like bringing some new deck building angles as well as exciting new cards. I think with our split set model, we are moving into the sort of realm where we're dropping play. I think we do think that dropping cards to players more often is really good because you just have that engagement moment where you can sort of dive in, try out new stuff, and the metagame is constantly sort of evolving on itself. So we definitely have some plans, nothing that we're going to be revealing at this time, but we think that in terms of at least the content, obviously we learned a bit about KDA and alternate universes and sort of what we can and can't do in our players' eyes. But we think that at least dropping the content, like having those sort of small content drops, is actually a good idea. And I think that players like that a lot.
That's true. I think the theme was divisive for some people, but I think the cards all that they were added and how they were added and the event itself was very well received. And I liked it a lot too. Another question which came up, so I think you haven't really answered it. Are you keeping the schedule for expansions like you have it like done now every 2 months, or are you saying we go back maybe to something like with every 6 months?
We are keeping it. Like I can say for sure that at least the next region you will see will be released every 2 months, and likely the region, we get 2 new regions next year. It's weird because I think that at Riot anything can change, and we listen to player feedback and we can always adjust. Though definitely at least expect the 6 months to look like the last 6 months. I think that just in terms of the like why this is good or bad, I think that there has been some negative feedback around it. One of the big ones is like, well, the metagame isn't really changing, which I think is kind of an interesting question because I think players see these same decks, and I think from other card games actually might do not that they do a better job, but oftentimes new sets just bring new decks, right? I think that we do a good job of that, but sometimes like, especially when there's a specific champion pairing like Tom Soraka, there might not be that much experimentation. So I will say that splitting up the set while it does give players more time for engagement, it means each release is going to be a bit less impactful. But I do think that overall it is a positive thing, and we're going to be looking to see how we can improve it going into next year.
Okay, thanks. I think we are 50 minutes over, so we have to come to the end now. I want to say thanks to everybody. Thanks Panda, thanks Rubin, thanks Hsuku, thanks 4W. It was amazing having you guys here. It was a great chat. I could talk with you for another hour without a problem. But we all have to be we have to be at places somewhere. And I'm also looking forward to the custom lore segment now with Roy. And this is something I really enjoy too, that there's such a good scene about creating custom cards. And I'm really looking forward to their chat right now. Which are the best custom cards for this year? And who knows, maybe Riot is listening and taking some in. So, thanks everybody. And it was, like I said, it was lovely having you guys here.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone, thanks for the participation. See you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Thanks for having us. It was a great experience. Very fun chat for sure.
Yeah, and I have a little present for you guys out. I know you like memes, so you can watch how Rubin replies to a question about Minna's food.
Smooth Soloist asks, nice name, by the way. Can you please remove the guy in Mina Swiftfoot's art so we can see the
My
foot
hair.
better?
What's going on with that?
See the foot better. So I'm not going to answer this question. Instead, I'm going to point to my background, which is Nimble Poro. And you can see that Nimble Poro is actually like pantomiming Mina. So the backstory is Nimble Poro is actually like saw Mina like kick the crap out of these guys, and he's now, because he has the headband and he's got like the kick, so he's actually emulating his hero, or his or her hero, which is Mina Swiftfoot, who recently got a buff, and is recently, I know that Random7HS is in the chat. He's probably pretty happy about that. But actually, female Poros can have mustache.
So, thanks for that. I think, Rubin, that was an amazing save from you. Great thing on your feet. And with that, I say goodbye, good night. Thanks for everybody. Thanks, people, for coming here. And yeah, the next segment is yours, Roy. See you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.